Hi everybody, it's Monday and it's 107 and it's time for Pirkei Avot, History and Hashkafa, brought to you by the Tel Aviv International Synagogue under the inspired leadership of Rabbi Ariel Constantine. We are presently continuing our discussion of a Mishnah in the third chapter, Mishnah 11. The statement of, or collection of statements by the second century scholar, Israeli scholar, Rabbi Lezer Hamodai, who was from the town of Modi'in. Those of you who know anything about Israel know, or have heard of Modi'in, the modern city, and for a long time scholars actually were of different minds as to whether Modi'in is located in the original site of Modi'in, which was the city of the Maccabees. But of late, scholars have, archaeologists, tend to think that in fact more or less it is in the same site. It's very exciting. They found there two synagogues from the time of the Second Temple, which would be more or less contemporary with Maccabees, maybe a little bit later, which confirms that identification. But what's really cool is that on Hanukkah, the city organizes a Hanukkah lighting, candle lighting at the site of the Second Temple synagogue. So if you're in Israel for next Hanukkah, do not miss this sort of merging of ancient and modern, which is of course standard operating procedure here in the land of Israel. Okay, the next passage. Last week we talked about humiliation and talked about social media, and this week the next thing that Rebbe Lezer Modai says that would cause a person to lose his place in the world to come is a painful one, literally and physically. It is Hamefer Brito Shel Avraham Avinu Alav Hashalom. Anyone who violates, anyone who undoes, anyone who desecrates the covenant of our father Abraham, may he rest in peace. So what is that referring to? It's very clear from the historical record that we are discussing here the circumcision. Circumcision has always, from Hellenistic days, been a bone of contention between the Western world, the world of Greece and Rome, and Judaism. The Torah makes it very clear that male circumcision on the 8th day is the sign of the covenant between Jews and God. It's a sign that's put in one's flesh that is there all the time. There's an interesting story which resonates in many, many ways. In the Midrash, that David Melech went to the bathhouse, and he was upset that he's undressed, he's bathing, and he has nothing Jewish. There's nothing Jewish about him at all. And then he remembered that he had his bris milah, so he felt he wasn't abandoned, that he wasn't totally denuded, with kind of funny weird word, of his Jewishness. So this idea of circumcision of males is so deeply embedded in Jewish consciousness that it is really one of the last two things to go when people assimilate. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I would like to mention the obvious question is, how come only men? So I'm not going to go. There are plenty of apologetic or even opportune reasons that are given for male circumcision, and as opposed to women. Women aren't physically able to have circumcision. What's called physical circumcision in other religions is just a horror. The Gemara has an interesting, but the Gemara the Talmud does address this issue. And the question at bar in the Talmud and Tractate of Avodah Zarah is, well, could a woman serve as a moa? Could a woman serve as a moa? On the one hand, she can't be circumcised. So maybe not. On the other hand, maybe she can. And there's a long discussion. It's on chat pay. If those of you are going to check on my sources, it's page 27a in Alodazar. And it's sort of an obvious proof, but the Gemara says that the Gemara cites the story that Moses, when he was on his way back to Egypt, had failed to circumcise his sons, and that and God was going to kill him for that, and so Tzipora took a knife and she circumcised her children, and Moses' life was saved. What that story means is topic for another discussion. But the Talmud says, you see from here that a woman can be a Moa. So why can a woman be a Moa? So then the Gemara said, then the Talmud come up with a very interesting observation. Again, you have to figure out what that means. Isha kaman demal yadamya. A woman is like a person who's already been circumcised. Now that can be that there's no need for circumcision, and therefore she's already taken care of, or it could mean that, and this is the way it's usually interpreted by responsible commentators, is that women are, spiritually speaking, on the same level, on a high, excuse me, on a higher level than men, and as a result, they don't require it. And the truth of the matter is that we do, in fact, paskin. We do, in fact, the law is that a woman can be a moa. This doesn't happen often. But there's no reason why women shouldn't be a moel. During the Yom Kippur War, for example, when there was most of the country was in the army, there was in fact a lack of mohalim, because a lot of them, at least the non-Haredi ones, were in the army, and women, in fact, women doctors at this point did in fact perform bris milah. So that's as far as that's concerned for the moment. In any event. If this is something so basic, and even to this day, people with the most minimal connection to being Jewish insist on circumcising their male children. So who are these people? So again, you have to go back to the original opposition to circumcision, because it hasn't changed all that much. The Greeks, followed by the Romans, worshipped the human body. They worshipped the human form. Any infirmity, any imperfection in the body was something to be avoided, and something to be regarded as negatively. Certainly imposing what seems to be imperfection on the body, which is born whole according to Greek thought, is something which is to be not just avoided, but is seen to be something barbaric. If you look at the Greek and Roman statuary, and by extension then also Renaissance and neoclassical art, then you see that all human forms are, even if they weren't, in reality, are portrayed as being absolutely perfect. The gods are perfect human beings. In fact, I must have quoted this before, but it's one of the most opportune comments I've ever seen. The great American classicist Edith Hamilton, who wrote the classic book on Greek mythology called Mythology, writes in the beginning of that book that as opposed to say the Egyptians, that the Greeks made the gods in their own image. The Greeks are simply perfect projections of how they wish they had to look. If you want to see the worship of celebrities as neo-pagan, I would not have any objection, but that's not for now. In any event, so they saw what the Jews were doing as being something totally barbaric, because they actually deformed the body, and part of the body that's critical for reproduction. And they ridiculed the Jews as barbarians. Wholeness was their motto. When Hellenism came to came to Judea and to other Jewish communities that were conquered by by Alexander and then ruled by his heirs, those Jews who were caught up and fell in love with Greek culture, and especially those who would participate in gymnastic games which were carried out naked, found themselves being humiliated by non-Jewish Greeks and ashamed of the fact that they were damaged goods. And so they developed this idea, they developed a procedure which was done without, there's no ether, guys, there's no anesthetic, of a primitive form of plastic surgery which would restore the foreskin to these individuals so that they could pretend that they weren't Jews. So there's a triple or quadruple kind of offense here. Number one, you're ashamed to be Jewish. Number two, you're actually damaging your body unnecessarily. It's against halacha. But more of all, you're basically saying that I think that the covenant I'm denying the covenant. That's what he says here. I'm covering up or undoing the sign of the covenant in me. That means I want nothing to do with the Jewish covenant at all. And through the ages, and through the ancient period, this would mark the Jew who was the apostate. He would undo the mark of the covenant. This business of circumcision as a marker of Jews that Jews stayed with through thick and thin, despite the fact that they were subject to humiliation and persecution, I might add, because the truth of the matter is that one of the reasons for the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE was the fact that the Emperor Hadrian, who was a fanatic Hellenist, really fanatic, what should you say, enthusiastic Hellenist. One of the things that he did was ban circumcision. And it's not even clear that he banned circumcision because he wanted to do something against the Jews. He just saw it as something that was so horrific to harm the sacred human body. He called it a form of castration. But because prohibition of circumcision was something that was a direct or indirect result of the legislation, the Jews revolted. So deeply did it affect, did they respond, so viscerally, so existentially did they respond to this prohibition. The result, by the way, Antiochus did the same thing earlier, was that Jews actually would have britot milah publicly in order to sort of stick it to them. But this is something we're willing to die for, which is really striking when the formal halacha is that you don't have to, you can avoid, if there is a prohibition against circumcision, then you can go with it or try to do it quietly or whatever to avoid problems. The only time you have to sort of proactively commit martyrdom is if demanded of you to worship a false god or change your religion, to kill somebody, or to indulge in sexual immorality. But yet this was something that hit home to such a degree that the Jews on their own turned it into a cause for martyrdom. So it says something about the background of this Mishnah, and this issue doesn't go away. And then among the Christians, it becomes an issue from another direction. One of the earliest debates in the early church was whether a person who wants to become a Christian has to become Jewish. Now, becoming Jewish, because it started as a Jewish sect, becoming Jewish requires circumcision of the male and immersion in a mikveh, or just immersion in a mikveh for a ritualarium for a woman, and accepting the mitzvot and so on and so forth. And this was a matter of major contention between two sections of the early church. There was the old school of the early the actual students of Jesus, headed up by his brother James or Jacob. And then those who followed Johnny-come-lately, whose name was Paul of Tarsus, who said, no, when Jesus came, it's all over, so you don't have to circumcise. In other words, you don't have to convert. You can become a Christian without becoming Jewish. On the contrary, all the mitzvot, all the commandments no longer obtain. And so if you're a Christian and whether you say you have to circumcise or not, became the question of which group you belong to. And that group, ultimately, the original group of Christians, ultimately disappeared because they were rejected as heretics because they said you had to be, in order to be Christian, you had to be Jewish. So that was another part of this. So a person could actually want to undo with circumcision, not just if they wanted to become a Greek pagan, they wanted to pass make it among the non-Jews, but also if you wanted to become a full-fledged Christian along the, not that Paul didn't demand it, but you can understand a person who might be so inclined, or whatever the motivation was. It's striking, however, that, and that's part of what's so amazing about the statement, is that this objection to circumcision never went away. I mean, it was always there when Jews lived under Christianity. When Jews lived under Islam, it was an issue because the Muslims also circumcised. So, all right, fine, the 13, 8 days, whatever the case might be. But Western Jews, were always sort of subjected for sermons and stuff like that. When churchmen would come into the synagogue and scream and yell that Jews should become Christians, they would get it between the eyes about circumcision. And that's the part that's really amazing, even in the secular world, the same sort of arguments of the Greeks and Romans, of Hellenistic high society, come back to bite us. There is ferocious, and I'm really serious, there's ferocious objection to circumcision in the secular world, on slightly different grounds, but maybe not so slightly different grounds. There were those who argued that it's child abuse, that you should wait until a kid's 18 to decide. There were those who argue that in general it's in principle wrong because the body should be left pristine, which is the Greek argument. There are laws that have been passed in various countries in Europe banning circumcision on grounds of such human rights and children and so on and so forth. And the question of human rights of children should be, at least, I can't, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to argue, I'm not going to present an argument the other way, but I will tell you something about what Judaism says. So why isn't that a civil right, a human right, a human rights issue? So number one, and without all of the questions about that circumcision is healthier and all the other arguments that are fine, because that's not really, I mean, at the end of the day, from a Jewish point of view, those are subsidiary issues. As I mentioned last week, I mean, again, that might be one of the themes of this mission. I will have to go back and take a look. There, as opposed to the position of late 20th century, or in general modern thought, and certainly as it expresses itself in postmodern thought or in late modern thought, there are three things that are the most sacred in contemporary Western thinking, and there are three things which are not less sacred, but of a different order in Jewish thinking. Contemporary Western culture is predicated upon the absolute autonomy and sanctity of the individual. The individual can do whatever they want, whenever they want, they can define themselves however they want, and no one can tell them anything, and no one can make demands of them. Okay? Absolute, total autonomy. That means that you can do with your body as you wish. You can do with your life as you wish. That's why euthanasia actually goes together with my body, myself. And you can do whatever you want with your reputation. Who cares? You can expose yourself as much as you want. The Torah teaches that all those things are sacred, but they don't belong to you. You don't own your body. Your body is a gift from God, which you are allowed to use and use to the fullest, but there is a point at which you're not allowed to, things you're not allowed to do, which includes, that's why you shouldn't smoke, actually, and take drugs and stuff like that. And you shouldn't harm yourself unnecessarily. Suicide is forbidden because your life does not belong to you, and your good name does not belong to you. So so since your body belongs to God, then God is fully entitled to say, I demand, I mean God speaking, I demand that every male Jew on the 8th day should be circumcised as a sign of the covenant to me, because at the end of the day, the Jew owes his ultimate allegiance not to other Jews, not to his people, but to God. It happens to be that the loyalty to other people and to the Jewish people is a direct corollary of that connection to God. But that's number one. That's why the question of human rights is not relevant, because it's not a right, it's an obligation. Judaism speaks in terms of obligations and not of rights. Now, it's very striking that some of the leaders, not surprisingly, but striking anyways, that some of the leaders of the anti-circumcision movement, who have imbibed all of this approach of a more Western, neo-Hellenist approach, are Jews, and they lead various movements against circumcision. At the end of the day, I don't know what goes on in the States, but I do know that 98, 99% of Israeli males are circumcised. And because it speaks to the most basic and most fundamental sense of continuity and loyalty among Jews, at least here in the land of Israel, I do know that circumcision is likely the last thing to go. But once it goes, Mefer Brito l'Shalom Ram Avinu, a person who violates the covenant, perhaps not by going through the painful, exquisitely painful operation to undo a bris milah, but who rejects it as a principle, as an issue, that's the last, most likely one of the last steps out of Judaism, because somehow in the collective consciousness of Jews, this is really something which is absolutely not negotiable. In fact, I know people who are patrilineal Jews. I mean, technically they're not Jewish, but who circumcise their children just because that's what you do. Raising an interesting question: if the child ever converts, whether they need to be, what do you do in those circumstances? But again, not for now. What I would like to leave you is an interesting question, which I hope to address when we finished working through all of the various strophes of this Mishnah, and that is that at the end of this whole list of things, of really nefarious kinds of behaviors that are listed by Lezer Modai, he says, such a person, even if he's very learned and has done tremendous amount of mitzvot, has no place in the world to come. So I want to ask, and that's something we'll discuss later on, as I said, towards the end, what kind of person with that kind of scholarship and that kind of piety is going to do any of these things? But that's something perhaps now you should start rolling around in your minds while we're proceeding. Anyways, this video will be up on my here on my Facebook page. It'll be up on the daily Torah Talk and lunchtime learning live streams with TAIS, Tel Aviv International Synagogue. It'll be on my web YouTube channel, and it'll go out obviously on Twitter and Instagram. I welcome your comments. Welcome you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you have questions or whatever, please don't hesitate to ask. Either you can put it in the comments below, or you're welcome to send me a direct message and ask. And we will see you next week. Try to stay. We're all in a heat wave. Try to stay cool. Bye.